The remainder of the questions in this treatise are going to be on the theological virtue of charity. And question 24 of Secunda Secundae is on the subject of charity. It is a long question, 12 articles, but I think I found a way to get through this pretty quickly and just give you kind of the main points. So the first article says whether the will is a subject of charity. So again, we are talking about the faculties of the human person, which is very important if you're going to understand the Summa, where we have intellect and will and passions and appetites and senses and all these things that make us such interesting creatures. So what Thomas is asking here, like he's asked with faith and hope previously, is what faculty of the human person is associated with the theological virtue of charity? And the answer is going to be, in fact, it is the will. And he says the appetite is twofold, namely the sensitive and the intellective, which is called the will. So the intellectual appetite is the will. The object of each is the good, but in different ways. For the object of the sensitive appetite is a good apprehended by sense, whereas the object of the intellective appetite or will is a good under the universal aspect of good. So we desire something like a pizza or a drink, that's sensitive appetite, but when it's something more universal or, graduating from college or getting married, those are universals. If there's something like that, then that would be more of an intellectual appetite having to do with the will. Now, the object of charity is not a sensible good, but the divine good, which is known by the intellect alone. Therefore, the subject of charity is not the sensitive, but the intellective appetite, which is the will. Article 2 says that, let's see, whether charity is caused in us by infusion. Okay, there are acquired virtues and then there are infused virtues. And we know already, we've learned that the three theological virtues are all infused. He says charity itself surpasses our natural facilities. Now that which surpasses the faculty of nature cannot be natural or acquired by the natural powers, since a natural effect does not transcend its cause. Okay, since the object of the theological virtues is God himself, and we can't get to God on our own, we need some supernatural help, and that's where the theological virtue comes in, because it's infused. Article 3, whether charity is infused according to the capacity of our natural gifts. Now this is interesting. Okay, do we get more charity based on our natural gifts? And Thomas says, since charity surpasses the proportion of human nature, it depends not on any natural virtue, but on the sole grace of the Holy Ghost, who infuses charity. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what our natural gifts are, other than the fact that we are a creature that is able to receive grace in this way. A dog or a cat or a salamander can't have this kind of grace infused into it, certainly not in any kind of normal manner. Whether charity can increase. He says the charity of a wayfarer, which is us here below, can increase. All right, so I will just leave it at that. Article 5, whether charity increases by addition. Okay, does it, little by little get added on? And he says charity increases by being intensified in its subject, and this is for charity to increase in its essence, and not by charity being added to charity. Okay, so really it's not by addition is what he's saying. Article 6, whether charity increases through every act of charity. He says charity does not actually increase through every act of charity, but by each act of charity we are disposed to an increase of charity, insofar as one act of charity makes man more ready to act again according to charity, and this readiness increases. And this readiness increasing, man breaks out into an act of more fervent love and strives to advance in charity, and then his charity increases actually. So it's kind of a fine line there, kind of splitting hairs, but Thomas ultimately says that it doesn't really increase strictly through the act of charity, but that it disposes us to increase in charity when we do these kind of acts, right? Whether charity increases indefinitely. He says charity itself, considered as such, has no limit to its increase, since it is a participation of the infinite charity, which is the Holy Ghost. So I think, yes, it does. It can increase indefinitely. He said, it is therefore evident that it is not possible to fix any limits to the increase of charity in this life. Article 8 says whether charity can be perfect in this life. And this one's a little bit longer. I want to read this because I think it's interesting, because he's comparing us as wayfarers down here below to the folks in heaven, right? If we, get to heaven, we'll experience this. He says, on the part of the person who loves, charity is perfect. When he loves as much as he can, this happens in three ways. First, so that a man's whole heart is actually always born towards God. This is the perfection of those who are in heaven, and it is not possible in this life, wherein by reason of the weakness of human life, it is impossible to think always actually of God and to be moved by love towards him, okay? Because of original sin and concupiscence, we can't do that, right? We're distracted. We're always being pulled away from him, right? Secondly, so that man makes an earnest endeavor to give his time to God in divine things, while scorning other things except insofar as the needs of the present life demand. This is the perfection of charity that is possible to a wayfarer. It's hard, but it is possible. But it is not common to all who have charity. Thirdly, so that a man gives his whole heart to God habitually, that is, by neither thinking nor desiring anything contrary to the love of God, and this perfection is common to all who have charity. Okay, so three different stages or levels there. I find that interesting. Whether charity is rightly distinguished in 3 degrees: beginning, progress, and perfection. He says the divers degrees of charity are distinguished according to the different pursuits to which man is brought by the increase of charity. For at first it is incumbent on man to occupy himself chiefly with avoiding sin and resisting his concupiscences. Okay, so that's the first stage, which move him in opposition to charity. This concerns beginners, in whom charity has to be fed or fostered lest it be destroyed. In the second place, man's chief pursuit is to aim at progress in the good, and this is the pursuit of the proficient, whose chief aim is to strengthen their charity by adding to it, while man's third pursuit is to aim chiefly at union with and enjoyment of God. This belongs to the perfect, who desire to be dissolved and to be with Christ. Now that is awesome. That is a great paragraph. I'd love to read that again. I won't, but that's very important. Okay, so this Article 9 I think is very important. Article 10, whether charity can decrease. He says a decrease in charity cannot be caused either by God or by some sinful act. Mortal sin does not diminish charity in either of these ways, but destroys it entirely, both effectively because every mortal sin is contrary to charity. So it doesn't decrease, it's just obliterated, right, by mortal sin. Article 11, whether we can lose charity once we have it. And of course, that is possible. Accordingly, the charity of the blessed, because it entirely fulfills the potentially of the rational mind, since every actual movement of the mind is directed to God, is possessed of its subject inseparably. So he's saying those in heaven who have charity cannot lose it, right? Because they're united to God, they can't lose it. Whereas the charity of the wayfarer, you and me, does not so fill the potentiality of its subject, because the latter is not always actually directed to God, so that when it is not actually directed to God, something may occur whereby charity is lost. Okay, so those in heaven cannot lose it, but we can. Finally, Article 12, whether charity is lost through one mortal sin. He says charity, being an infused habit, depends on the action of God who infuses it, stands in relation to the infusion and safekeeping of charity, as the sun does to the diffusion of light in the air. So he's making a comparison here. Consequently, just as the light would cease at once in the air, were an obstacle placed in it being lit up by the sun, even so charity ceases at once to be in the soul through the placing of an obstacle to the outpouring of charity by God in the soul. Now it is evident that through every mortal sin which is contrary to God's commandments, an obstacle is placed to the outpouring of charity, since from the very fact that a man chooses to prefer sin to God's friendship, which requires that he should obey his will, it follows that the habit of charity is lost at once through one mortal sin. I know sometimes that's kind of controversial because people say, oh gosh, I lived my whole life great, and then at my end of my life I commit one mortal sin. Am I going to go to hell? And the answer is yes, if it fulfills all the requirements of a mortal sin, being deliberate will, grave matter, and free choice, then yes, you will. And I think that helps to explain that a little bit better. All right, that is going to do it for this question 24 of Secunda Secundae on the subject of charity, and we will continue with our next question on charity in our next video.